Welcome to my ranking of films which came out in the year 1991, or at least the ones that I've seen. And to my surprise, when I was planning this video, I realised I'd only seen 19 films from this particular year. Now, if you saw my previous video in this series, my ranking for 1990, you'll know that there were 38 films that I'd seen in that year. So to drop 50% from one year to the next was certainly an eye-opener, but that's just the way the cookie crumbles. So I'm going to rank all these films today, starting with the film I would put 19th and ending with the film which I think is the best from 1991. The top two films today will go through to the eventual grand final of 100 films, where I will be declaring once and for all what the greatest film of all time is. But for now, let's crack on with the ranking today and find out what is my 19th and therefore least favourite film that came out in 91. I really detest this film. I was never into the whole Peter Pan thing anyway when I was younger, but I certainly wasn't going to be into it by the time I was 11 or 12 when my dad took me and my brother to go and see this. I was just so bored watching it. I literally resented having to sit there and watch it. My brother, who's 4 years younger than me, might have enjoyed it a little bit more because I think he would have been about 7 on that particular day. What makes my memory of the film even worse, though, is that about a week after that cinema trip, I was coming out of school with a friend of mine and we were going off to play football. Suddenly his mum came out of nowhere and said, "Oh, where are you going? We've got the cinema trip." And I said to my friend, what cinema trip? He said, oh, we're off to watch Hook. I totally forgot. Sorry, man. I was like, oh, so football's ruined because now my friend's got to go off and watch that bloody awful movie. So no, I really just don't like Hook. I don't like Peter Pan. Bottom of the list today. This film made $175 million at the box office. I find that absolutely remarkable. I just don't think a film like this could do that these days. I mean, this is a really simple domestic thriller. It's like a made-for-TV movie, at least by the standards of 2021. Back then, I guess things were different. I've never really understood the whole Julia Roberts thing. She's never done it for me. I thought she was pretty good in Pretty Woman, no pun intended, but everything else I've seen her in, I just find her really, really boring and bland. Patrick Bergen's in this film as the evil, abusive husband trying to chase down his wife who wants nothing to do with him. Bergen played Robin Hood at one point, only to see his film completely overshadowed by the Kevin Costner version of Robin Hood. He doesn't have much better luck here. This film, for me, is just really dull. Even back in the 90s when I watched it, I found it dull. Very, very forgettable fare. Let's move on. This is another one I saw when I was growing up in the 90s. It's always puzzled me as to why it's sort of considered to be a little bit of a classic. I don't know, is it? I don't hear people talking about it so much these days, but there was a time in the past where it seemed to be quite a famous movie, but to me it's just a road trip movie with two women bonding together and then throwing themselves off a cliff. There's nothing particularly special about it. I enjoyed it a little bit more than Sleeping with the Enemy, but I honestly can't remember hardly anything about it apart from that ending. This is a film about a bunch of amateur tap dancers who come together to try and put on a show at the end of the year or something like that. I'm willing to bet that there's not a single bloke watching this video who has ever seen this film. So if you actually have seen it, please put a comment below so I can then thank you for letting me feel like I am no longer the only guy who has ever sat through this. It's not completely terrible. It's better than some of the films on this ranking. It does have some good drama elements to it, some good characters. The reason why I watched it in the first place is because I went round to my aunt's this one time and they were just about to watch this film. I literally had a choice of watch Stepping Out or just turn around and look at the wall for 2 hours. I chose the film. For what it is, it was all right. It's not usually my sort of thing, obviously, but it didn't offend me. And there is sort of a feel-good factor at the end of it when they finally put on this show and you realise that they've come so far, because they're absolutely awful at dancing at the start of this film. By the end, they're reasonably good, but it's certainly not a film I would recommend. So I'm charting this one low today, but I don't consider it to be one of the worst Nightmare on Elm Street films. I'm not the biggest fan of the franchise. I mean, some of those films are just painful to sit through. I wouldn't say that this is one of those. I think it's all right. It's got some good stuff in it. There's some really good horror involving vertigo. There's one kill involving this guy who gets these really sensitive ears and his head explodes. That's really cool. I think the way that the mythology expands in this film is quite interesting. I think the story is very good, how they've taken it forwards into some kind of futuristic apocalypse where most of the town is deserted. What holds the film back is just there's just too much silliness in between all the good stuff. Freddy on a broomstick is just absolutely terrible. Tonally, there are problems throughout, but I still enjoy this movie. I gave it 3 out of 5 when I reviewed it. I'd probably reduce that now on reflection to 2.5 out of 5, but I'll stand by my words on this. I think this is a bang average horror film, but I don't think it's a bad one. Absolutely one of the worst sequels ever made, but it has crossed into that rarest of territories, the so bad it's good territory. So for that reason, I can still watch this film. I would rather watch this than Highlander 3, which is technically a slightly better film, but that one is really bland. It's basically just copying the first one, but it's not as good. Number 2 is fun. You can just watch it and pick it apart. If somebody invited me around to their house for beers and the chance to watch this and have a laugh with it, I'd be totally up for that. I mean, when you're watching this, you can sit there and challenge yourself to explain away all the plot holes and inconsistencies from the first film. It's a nice little intellectual challenge, I think. So Highlander 2 might be a car crash, but I was certainly never going to put it towards the bottom of this ranking. But what I will say is it should absolutely be used as an example to film school students as to what can happen when you try and make a film sequel for something that didn't need it. This is one I saw a long time ago. It didn't really grip me. I found the bad guy annoying. The good guy is also annoying. I think if I'd have ever seen the original version of this that came out around about 1960, I would have enjoyed that more. I feel like this is a story which would be better suited to that old black and white style rather than making it in the early 90s and having that modern day sheen and casting somebody like De Niro. The original Cape Fear is absolutely on my bucket list to see eventually, although it's a very, very big bucket list. I mean, as buckets go, it's like a magician's bucket. If I looked into it, it would actually be a cavern inside the bucket full of films that I've never gotten around to seeing. Probably my favourite Cape Fear related thing has nothing to do with either film. It's to do with the old Simpsons episode where they basically parodied Cape Fear for an entire episode. That was a lot of fun. I think that was around about season 5 of The Simpsons. It's going very, very far back. This film actually has possibly my favourite kill in the whole franchise when the guy is walking through the street and he just gets whacked into by this wrecking ball. I found that to be quite an unsettling moment. I don't recall too much about the rest of the movie, but just based on my memories of it, I'm prepared to give it a reasonably high place in the ranking today. Of course, a lot of years have passed since I was a teenager. I am sure if I watched Omen 4 again today, my opinion of it would go down, considering all the film knowledge and experience I've picked up since then, and my tastes have become a little bit more sophisticated since those days. But as of today, at the time of making this video, I don't remember Omen 4 being that bad. Ooh, we were so close to having a Child's Play movie in the top 10. If it was going to happen, it would have been today because Child's Play 3 is my favourite in the franchise. There are other films that I respect in this series. Child's Play 2 is pretty good. I like Curse and Cult as well, but number 3 for me is the very best. I love the military school setting. I like the fact that Andy has grown up in this one. That works better for me than having him running around trying to survive Chucky as a child. I like the fact that this film ends in a fairground setting for the last sort of 15-20 minutes. And there's a girl in this who's absolutely amazing. Can't remember her name, but she's really good. So yeah, Child's Play 3 for me is the absolute pinnacle. But yeah, so close to the top 10. I can guarantee you now that the next one after this, Bride of Chucky, the awful Bride of Chucky, will be nowhere near the top 10. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. On the one hand, this is such cheesy Hollywood bullshit. On the other hand, though, it's so much fun to watch. How can you not love the sight of Kevin Costner firing flaming arrows in slow motion? I've got a really personal story to tell when it comes to this film. I saw it a lot when I was growing up, but there's this one viewing of the film that I had, which was quite special actually. So my friend invited me on his, I think it would have been his 12th birthday meal out. So about eight of us, plus his dad, went to this Indian restaurant. It was the first time I'd ever had an Indian meal, and I thought it was amazing. I discovered a new love in life that day. After that, we went back to his house and we watched Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. I think it was probably the most grown-up movie that we could get away with renting. And it was just a nice thing to sit there with our stomachs full from all this Indian, watching this pretty cool movie. It's a memory that I sort of cherish in a way, I guess, because I don't see that friend anymore. But when I look back on those days, that is a day that I can remember. I tried to put this film on for my 7-year-old son a few years ago, and I'd completely forgotten the fact that there is quite a bit of violence in it, even though it's like a PG or a 12 or whatever. It is quite grown up in a lot of its tone. I mean, within about 5 minutes of putting it on for him, I realised I'd made a mistake because it starts off in a dungeon and there's all these prisoners screaming in pain and stuff. And my wife was like, "What are you doing putting this on for him?" I'm like, I don't remember this being like this. The original Howling is my favourite werewolf film of all time, which is going to make my next statement sound a little bit odd. I've never seen any of the sequels apart from number 6. Now, I think the reason why I've never gone to number 2 in this series is because I know that the tone changed massively. It's a completely different type of film. I have though seen number 6. It was on TV back in the 90s, and I remember it being pretty good. My memories are quite vague of exactly what happens in it now. Something to do with a circus, and I think there might be a vampire in this one. And one thing I definitely remember is that the bad guy in Howling 6 was the same bad guy from Passenger 57, which was an action film that I watched a couple of times around about that same period. Another really weird thing when it comes to me and this film, Howling 6, there used to be this band called Ultimate Chaos. They were a short-lived thing in the 90s, and they did a song called Freaks, and I just happened to have this song on cassette for a while. Howling 6 is called Howling 6 Freaks or The Freaks, and whenever I was listening to this song by Ultimate Chaos, I always used to believe in my own mind that it was the soundtrack to Howling 6, even though it absolutely wasn't. Ultimate Chaos were not the sort of band to sing about werewolves. But it's just one of those weird things that I look back on and think, yeah, that was silly, but in a funny way, it helped my memory and appreciation of the movie, weirdly. This is a really good one. Not that I've seen it in 25 years. I just remember it being really atmospheric. This boy and I think his older brother going into this house and getting trapped. The story just goes off in all these weird, completely unpredictable directions. The bad guy in this, played by Everett McGill, is just completely weird. He's running around at one point in a PVC outfit, just firing his shotgun at the walls and stuff. I love his death as well when he says, "Oh, I'm going to count my money again one day," or something like that, and then he gets blown up. If only I had time to go back and watch all the really cool films that I remember. I guess if I didn't spend as much time making videos. Star Trek 6 has a decent reputation. I am happy to uphold that reputation. I saw it for the first time, again, round at my aunt's when I was very young. You never knew what you were going to get when you went round to my aunt's. Sometimes you might get a chick flick like Stepping Out. Sometimes they might be watching Star Trek 6. It was sort of like opening a box of chocolates. I don't think I watched the full film that night, though. I think my first full viewing of this was not until my late 30s, actually, when I randomly decided to go through all of the Star Trek films that were done by the original cast. And that's another thing to note about this one, The Undiscovered Country. it was the last time that all the original crew members would be together, and I don't know, it's quite poignant when you watch it now and realize that they would not be coming back for another. I'm not convinced they knew that at the time that they were doing it. This film takes a look at the assassination of President Kennedy back in '63. Officially, they got their man for this, didn't they? Lee Harvey Oswald. But there have always been these conspiracy theories surrounding this incident, this idea that maybe something else was going on. This film takes a look at those theories. Now, I have to say, out of all the really famous conspiracy theories throughout history, this one to do with this incident is probably one of those that I find at least somewhat believable. I could believe that something more was going on than meets the eye with the death of Kennedy. Probably watching this movie has put me in that uh, position to think that maybe if I'd not seen this film, I wouldn't give that much credence to some of the theories that are explored here. But who knows? It's one of those things that you just make your own mind up on, really. But as a film, it's absolutely fascinating. It's very long. Whichever version you watch, it's like 3 hours plus. Another Kevin Costner classic in the same ranking. This is about a guy who gets into a car crash and loses his arm, but luckily there's this science company who's able to give him a new one, not a prosthetic arm, an actual real arm that's been procured from a dead body. So at first it's like, hey, yay, great, I've got a brand new arm. But eventually this arm starts to misbehave. I think in the middle of the night in one scene, this arm tries to strangle the guy's wife, and other bizarre things start to happen. And it turns out that this limb was taken originally from a dangerous criminal. And there's all these other people who have had limbs from this science company and they're having problems. And there's a mysterious assassin killing the people who have gotten limbs from this company as well. So it's a really good thriller. It's got a really great twist towards the end, a really enjoyable final skirmish. It's a creepy film. Sadly, I just think it's one of those films that is quite forgotten. I'm not sure if it does have any kind of decent home release. I'll have to check that out. But if you've never seen this film, do try and get hold of it. It's a good one. Jeff Fahey is the leading man in it. Shattered is of a similar ilk to Body Parts. I'd say it's another thriller. I think there's a car crash involved in its central mystery as well. It's been a long time since I saw it, but I really enjoyed this. I think I saw it a couple of times in the 90s. Bob Hoskins is in it. One of his best movies, I'd say. Greta Skarki, I've never been able to pronounce her name. She's in it. There are lots of really good twists late in the day on this one. Very well made film. If you can find it, I absolutely recommend this. It's good. Probably the best film ever made about firefighting, at least until Halloween Kills came along. But no, Backdraft is a really good film, hence why I've got it at number 3 today. I don't understand why there aren't more films about firefighting. It's such a cinematic thing, watching guys going up against huge fires and buildings falling apart and ceilings collapsing and stuff. And there are so many great stunts and set pieces in this film. The central mystery behind it is really clever. The performances are all good. I guess these days, if you want more of something like this, there is the TV show Chicago Fire, which has been running a long time now. Me and my wife watched that for about 6 seasons, which is a long time for me to watch a show before I check out. That is highly recommended. And so is Backdraft. If you've never seen this film and you like a good thriller, check this out. So our first qualifier for the final today is Silence of the Lambs. This is just cinema gold. I'm not entirely sure what genre this would fall into, but it's such an amazing film. Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter is just amazing. Jodie Foster's good in this. Probably the only time I've ever thought that about her. I've just never seen Jodie Foster in any other films really apart from this. Why didn't she come back for Hannibal? Why? Buffalo Bill is a great killer. That scene at the end when they're having that face off in the dark and Buffalo Bill's got the night vision goggles. It's just an amazing finish to a movie. And then, of course, there's the whole escape part with Lecter. That scene alone is worth the price of admission. I do have a sad story when it comes to this movie, though. When I was in my 20s, I was in town on a Saturday afternoon and I bought Silence of the Lambs in a steelbook, took it to a cafe, put it down on the seat next to me, had my coffee, and then of course walked out of the cafe without the movie. And it was only when I was on the bus home that I realised my mistake. I thought, no. I've never met anybody who dislikes this film. If by chance you're watching this video and you seriously do dislike Terminator 2, by all means drop a comment saying exactly why you dislike it, because I've never met anybody who has had anything other than good things to say about this movie, even people who are not particularly big on Terminator films or action films. So Terminator 2 goes through to the grand final along with Silence of the Lambs. We also have Terminator 1 already qualified for that grand final. How will the Terminators fare in that eventual top 100? We will find out one day. But for now, there is one more question left to ask. I've only written 3 films down, which is a little bit surprising to me, given the fact that we only had 19 films in the main ranking, but it's just a bit of a thin year. So the films I've written down: Point Break, very famous film. I've just never seen it. It was never on TV when I was growing up. Two Evil Eyes, which is a mini horror anthology featuring 2 stories, I'm guessing of about 45-50 minutes each. One of them is from Dario Argento, the other one is from George Romero. I love both of those directors, so I will absolutely be watching this film more than any other out of these 3. And the other film I've written down is called Sometimes They Come Back. I've read the original short story by Stephen King. I guess made into a full-length feature, it could be interesting. I've never seen it, maybe one day, but out of these 3, Two Evil Eyes would be the one that I would really want to watch. Right, that's all for today. That was my ranking for 1991. I'll be back soon with a ranking for 92. Until next time, cheerio.